I like patterns and order in my life. That's what's so special about weaving. Back and forth, with the weft through the warp on a shuttle. I used a vertical loom to make my seamless robes and took pride in my craft. It took a long time to make garments. Why, even making thread took several months. Clothing was so valued, it was passed down to family members, cared for like a treasure, and worn out before being discarded. And my seamless robes were no exception. It was hard work to bring the ends together at side angles so that the 6-foot width of fabric became tubular. After that, it only needed to be trimmed and finished to be worn as a tunic. Purple was the hardest color to make, therefore it was the most prized. Though our purple was tinged more red back then. While the fabric came from the land, the dye came from the sea. Tiny little snails that dyed your hands a reddish purple, like blood that doesn't fade. Is it any wonder I wear gloves? Most weavers' hands bear the mark of their craft, and it doesn't wash away. Jesus wore my robe. I recognized the pattern. What artist doesn't recognize their own work? But why did he wear my robe? Why was I part of this violent, disorderly death? How could they cast lots on my robe while he watched? It was a mockery that they treasured the robe more than the person who wore it. They took away his dignity and took away my craftsmanship. What clothing was there for the king of criminals? Our king wasn't allowed to wear the purple. Do you know the irony of my seamless robe? A seamless robe was considered to be without flaw, symbolic of God's perfection. How I mocked Jesus for wearing it then. How I understood why now. But even more irony for you. The soldiers didn't tear apart the robe because it was believed that tearing apart a seamless robe would be offensive to God. You could be cursed for cutting its thread and disrupting the perfect circle. What a mockery of Jesus! Wasn't tearing him apart and cutting his life's thread as bad? Wasn't mocking his death as offensive? I didn't want to be a part of this. I didn't ask to have the stains upon my hands. I go back and forth about this all the time. My life in full circle, back to the seamless robe. I gave Jesus mockery while he gave me mercy. I wish the pattern of my life were different. My life of different thread. Look at what I gave Jesus. And look at what he gave me.
It was supposed to be funny. Somebody called for a crown, so I made one. It took maybe all 5 minutes, maybe less. No really skill really involved either. I was really just trying to impress the soldiers. I didn't think they're going to keep it on them, honest. You ever made a crown? Kids like the ones that make out of flowers, but branches are a lot easier to weave than stems. I can tell you how to make one. All you gotta do, take a young branch, about the size of your finger, a little longer than the length of my arm, break it, and then you weave it end over end a few times, almost like you're like tying a knot. But I did have to be careful when I pressed it into my stomach. And then you take the 2 thorn ends, weave them end over end from first to finish, and there you have it. You know, it's funny. Actually, I tried the crown on my head before I gave it to the soldiers. I started thinking about what was funny when I saw my crown on Jesus' head. Thorns are a sin, you know. You remember when Adam left the garden and he was cursed and thorns grew instead of grain? Thorns represent the fall of man and the curse of his sins. That's how I mock Jesus' fall. Why do you have to keep it on? I didn't want him to keep wearing it. It must be painfully funny to think that I wore the crown first, then Jesus. What a joke. For my crown of thorns, I gave him mockery, and he gave me majesty. I gave him and he gave me glory. I remember I even pricked my fingers on one of the thorns. I still kept weaving that stupid crown. This all part of a bloody joke. The crown was plucked from a branch of Jesse's tree. Thorns, jokes, curses. Yet he wore my crown. He wore my sins. Look what I gave Jesus. Look what he gave me.
Leather has many uses. Clothing, tents, harnesses, saddles, armor, shoes. I've made them all. That's what I do. Did you know that the ancient Hebrews were among the first people credited with using oak bark to tan leather? Before the discovery of tannins, cured leather was hard and unyielding, even when beaten. Tanning leather using tannins found in bark made it soft, flexible, supple. It was so soft, you would forget it was animal skin, that it was once part of a living thing. But even when it was soft, it didn't take us long to figure out how to use leather for weapons. Bowstrings, slingshots, ropes, whips. Whips. The leather that was so soft and flexible would sting like a snake. Even worse, it would cut into flesh like sharp teeth when bits of metal were attached to it. Did you know that scourges with metal ends were actually called scorpions? I felt like one sometimes as I caressed the leather that made these whips. It was odd that we worked so hard to make something so soft, even beating it, only so we could turn around and use it to beat others. Think about it. An animal sacrificed its life in order to help take the life of a man. Whips, scourges, legal ways to lash out, to hurt, and degrade. Jewish law only allowed 40 lashes. They actually made it 39 in case there was a miscount. It was not pleasant. Some of the things I created with leather and the way they were used. Scourging was considered half death, a way to torture that came as close to killing as possible without actually doing it. Unlike Jewish law, Roman law had no limit on the number of lashes they could inflict on a victim. And while Jesus was Jewish, it was the Romans who beat him. And of course, I made my whips for the Romans. Leather may be soft, but people are not. I gave the Lord Jesus suffering, and he gave me salvation. I do not deserve it, but still I take it because my sins had beaten me, and I needed someone else to whip them. Look what I gave Jesus. And look what he gave me.
Nails. My nails. Did you know that nails were one of the first things man made with metal? In some cultures, nails were so valuable that they burned down entire buildings and sifted through the ashes to retrieve them, rather than pulling them out and risk damaging them. Nails were handmade, hammered to a long spike, tapered to a point and cut at the end and squared. I like to think of my nails as connectors, connecting one thing to another to build something useful. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking of the nails that connected Christ to the cross, of the spikes that fastened him and caused so much pain and torment and useless death. Well, I prefer to think of nails in a better way. I do not want to think of the truth. I don't want to consider all the pain and torture and death that they forge. Because they're my nails. My nails nailed Jesus to the cross. The work of my hand. Nails are strong. We trust nails to hold hundreds of times their weight. When I think of nails, when I think of iron, I think of iron will. When we try to describe strength, when we try to describe what strength is to us, strength of heart, strength of mind, strength of soul, we think of iron, and rightly so. The chemical name, the symbol for iron is Fe. I like that. I heard it said in a distant language, Fe translated to faith. And when I think of faith, I do. I think of Jesus' strong faith, his iron will, how he held hundreds of times the weight of my sin. My sin. I gave Jesus torture, and he gave me truth. So I have hope. I trust in the hope that was completed on the cross. I trust in the one stronger than my metal. Look at what I gave Jesus. And look at what he gave me.
Don't look at me like that. Did you expect me to give up my livelihood for a convicted criminal? Of course I made the cross. If I didn't, someone else would. Jobs are hard to come by. Don't you get it? You can't blame me. I had to make a living for my family. I couldn't sacrifice them for him. Crosses are hard to make, but the pay is good. I had no other choice. I understand that Jesus was a carpenter too. He would have appreciated my work. We Jewish carpenters are a rare breed. There aren't many in our history. It wasn't an occupation that thrived, what with all the invasions and the wars from countries more powerful and advanced than we were. Do you know how strong a carpenter has to be? Making a cross is hard work. We have to go out and cut the wood down, and then we have to square it off with a hand adze or a saw. It's long, strenuous hours. Jesus would have known this. What would you have done? I knew it was my cross. People always ask me, what did you use to make it? How big was it? Like I really care. I used something cheap, pine or dogwood. It was 12 feet by 6 feet. The Romans liked them big. I made it out of 4x4s, I think. But you know what? Doesn't really matter. One cross is much like another one. I didn't even bother to sand it. That would have been a sacrifice of my time and my talent. Besides that, the Roman soldiers liked it raw and full of splinters. You know, it's funny. A tree in the Garden of Eden caused all of our problems. And a tree of a carpenter solved them. Wood saved Noah from water. Wood saved us from fire. I couldn't disobey the Romans. I made the cross. I gave Jesus sorrow. He gave me sacrifice. I'm not the strongest carpenter. I can't take back what I've made or what I did. But he can. Look at what I gave Jesus, and look at what he gave me.
In the beginning, God created the earth and all that is in it, and a stone that is a part of the earth. As I touch it, I feel I'm holding a part of history, even possibly a stone from the very beginning of time. As my Creator fashions me, I will hammer and chisel a stone to create within it a new purpose. Quite possibly the purpose God intended from the beginning. It takes time to chisel a stone, a 2-ton stone. It is meant to seal the tomb. The wealthy families would expect that tomb with its stone to be chiseled flat on the bottom so that it could not easily be rolled away. The wealthy families would expect also that the bed that would have a pillow at the foot and the head of the bed to be chiseled of solid stone. I made the stone that sealed Jesus' tomb, but he was not to be at that tomb. His family was hard up. The poor were typically buried in the ground, yet he was not. Jesus' family was not from Jerusalem. That tomb was to be the tomb of a rich family, a family that was Jerusalem born. Joseph had him buried in that tomb to fulfill the Jewish requirement of burial before the Sabbath. You may blame me, for a stone is to be final, just as death is final. But a stone is noble, a stone is history. Just as David killed Goliath with a stone, just as Jesus knocked out death, Jesus is our cornerstone. Is he not our rock that we cling to? My stone was rolled away. What a timely monument of Jesus' powerful salvation. Stones are heavy, but so is my heart. All of creation was used against Jesus, even the very stones that he created. I gave him death, but he gave me deliverance. Look at what I gave Jesus, and look at what he gave me.
When they laid him in the tomb, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble.